All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our mini conference today. And thank you for joining us for a discussion on compassion and ABA. I'm Dr. Ehren Werntz, Vice President of Family and Community Services here at AZA. I'll be presenting with our keynote and my clinical counterpart, Carrie Baranek. And today we'd like to explore the concept of compassion beyond its everyday use, and describe some of what we at AZA are doing to shape our practices around a more specific and measurable understanding of this definition of compassion. Okay, so have you noticed the word pairs of compassion and ABA showing up more and more these days? I certainly have. Some people might find that strange, maybe less so after our previous presentation, but we might think, isn't ABA therapy about helping people? Often people with disabilities. Of course it should be about compassion. Maybe others aren't surprised that this is a more recent phenomenon. We're absolutely listening to more and more voices critiquing ABA for an apparent lack of compassion. Some of this feedback is coming from within the field of ABA. These are calls to action in our professional literature to pay more attention to compassion and formalize it in our training and practice. Again, as Carrie referenced in their previous presentation, we'll talk more about today. I want to mention briefly that because ABA is a science-based field, scientific literature is important because it helps drive change and innovation. So bear with me as I pull back the curtain to explain what's happening within the culture of ABA today, and specifically how AZA United is trying to lead the way. I think it's important to note that these calls for compassion are not without merit. The good news is that the field appears to be responding to these actions or these calls to action in meaningful ways. As a bit of evidence of that, I recently did a search for presentation titles at our big international conference called ABAI. I found that between 2004 and 2006, there were 4 presentations that contained the word compassion. Between 2012 and 2014, there were 8. And between 2021 and 2023, there were 92. Oh, let me jump it down. The increased attention being given to the concept of compassion in ABA is a very good thing. One worry that I have, though, is that the word compassion remains abstract and is adopted more because it's an attractive, feel-good slogan, rather than having a functional definition that is useful to orient and evaluate our professional behavior and measurably impact those that we serve. I'd like to give a little bit of the historical context for why we're even having a discussion about compassion in ABA, and tell you about what we've been doing to tangibly move our programs toward a measurable definition of that term. To understand why we are seeing and hearing these calls for compassion in recent years, we have to understand that ABA comes from a tradition of natural science, meaning that what we know about human behavior comes from more than 100 years of observing, examining, measuring behavior of all types across all types of situations. Behaviorism and behavior analysis was a reaction to a more theory-based approaches to psychology, like Freudian theory, which later contributed to some not only ineffective but really, really harmful treatments for autism. And one of the things that makes behavior analysis work so well is that it isn't a theory. It's not hypothetical. This is the precise measurement of behavior in response to defined interventions or teaching methods. It's a hard science, which we can see that culturally that can cut both ways. Behavior analysts are trained to understand learning processes, assessment methods, how to precisely define and measure behavior, how to conduct ourselves ethically, and how to understand research and research-based methods. It's the emphasis on evidence-based approaches and scientific analysis that makes ABA such a powerful therapy model. But it is the same emphasis that has left a bit of a blind spot, i.e. compassion and soft skills, for many BCBAs. If you don't already know, ABA has 7 defined dimensions. I'm not going to go into all of that here, but to say that these are the core tenets that guide ABA. Most of the dimensions have to do with scientific consistency, except for that first one, the applied dimension. This is the dimension and the commitment that the science of behavior will be applied to the issues that are important to the people and the communities that we serve. Our mantra in the field is save the world with ABA. And it's only with science and compassion that we will actualize this vision. Next, we're going to talk about our work to scientifically define compassion for the field of ABA, which we believe is an important step in keeping focused on universal outcomes that matter. The applied dimension of ABA has to do with understanding the importance of a behavioral issue for a person and a family and how it impacts their quality of life, now and in the future. What is quality of life? I believe quality of life is high when people can freely choose to do the things that matter to them. Compassion is an everyday word. It's a feel-good word. And it wasn't until recently that I thought of it as a scientific word. But since we're talking about compassion in the context of ABA, I think precision and measurability is important. And our recent paper in the Journal of Behavior Analysis and Practice seeks to do just that. I share that we put it into the scientific literature because this is one of the main ways to influence and change to influence change and development in our field. It's important that we don't let compassion only exist in ABA as a buzzword. As I mentioned earlier, we see compassion showing up more and more. Again, this is a really, really good thing. Here are a few definitions of compassion in recent ABA publications. Action designed to alleviate the suffering of another person. Compassion converting empathy into an act aimed at the alleviation of suffering. Behavior aimed at the alleviation of the suffering of others. You can see a few common themes: intent and relief of suffering. I agree that our compassionate action should relieve the suffering of others. Where these definitions fall short for me is that they rely on a person's intent. If we're going to scale compassion, meaning that if we want to see compassionate behavior throughout the industry, we can't rely on what people intended to do. We need to understand if and how others were impacted by our compassionate actions. When we're suffering, when we're anxious, when we're distressed, when we're scared, when we're nervous, we're not generally thinking about many more things than how to get out of feeling the way that we do. Maybe you can relate to this. I certainly can. Aversive conditions like this have what we call a repertoire narrowing effect, meaning that we do fewer things when we're feeling this way. Having said that, if we understand compassion to relieve suffering, then the result should be repertoire expansion, meaning that the person has more choices available to them and they're doing more things. So again, if we relate quality of life to the range of freely chosen options a person has for themselves, looking for markers of this within and as a result of our practice should ideally keep us oriented in the right direction. Furthermore, where we see choice being limited or restricted, this is where we should intervene and apply compassion and then be set up to evaluate its outcome. I'm going to speak broadly about three main areas where we use ABA and where we are keeping our eyes on compassion and choice. First, in our direct care work, and Carrie's going to speak to more of this in greater detail. But first and foremost, nothing is forced. We operate from the assumption that behavior only changes when somebody wants to do it, and forcing only pushes that goal further away. Behavior change is a choice that needs to be available for a learner to choose the most rewarding option such that they do it again and again. Along these same lines, if a session is clearly upsetting, the content to proceed can be withdrawn. And in terms of programming, we should make sure that we're teaching skills that lead to more and more and more choices becoming available over time. And with respect to problem behavior, we should also monitor how choice expands as behavior improves. When supporting caregivers, it's important that treatment be focused on doing things that matter, things that they aren't doing because of interfering behavior. Behavior intervention should be tied to ways of being that parents would choose for themselves. And I'll touch on more of that later. In terms of organizational behavior, it's important to assess the type of work our employees value, not just what they want to do, but the type of impact they want to make or what type of legacy they want to leave behind, along with what type of stressors or barriers might be keeping them from doing that. We've developed and recently started using what we call the aversion and choice assessment for work to identify these things and help us as leaders take action, take what action we can, and monitor changes over time. We believe that the amount of choice that one has within one's role is directly related to the quality of their work, their satisfaction, and how long they stay with us, which is why we build in and create opportunities for creativity and job crafting over time. Finally, there was a 2022 study that found that 70% of ABA professionals currently or had been working under some non-compete agreement. This is a condition of somebody's employment that forbids them from working for a competitor if they leave. We believe that working for AZA should be freely chosen, and anything less would run contrary to our definition of compassion. With that, I will hand it off to my friend and colleague, Carrie Brandy, to talk about the compassionate work she and her team and our children and youth services are doing at AZA.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. So I think in keeping with this idea of behavior analysts and myself and Erin and others having this fear that this idea of compassion becomes just a buzzword, just something that we kind of throw around, just a word to throw in a paper or a word to throw in a presentation, we can run the risk of kind of overusing it to where it really means nothing. But we all agree that it's important. But what I want to do is tell you a little bit about how our team, our ABA team in particular, what we've done to sort of help improve the experiences that clients are having in a more structured, formalized way, so that we can avoid this phenomena where the idea of consent just is an idea. We wanted to make sure that we're really putting it into practice and that we have sort of an organized, systematic way to do that. At AZA, we saw the need to develop this, something for our staff that help align their work towards the values of our organization. And many of our clinical staff were coming to us with these concerns. They had already begun to do some of this work. They were interested in these contemporary practices, and each of them were sort of responding in their own ways. But as we listened to families and as we talk about our own work, we realized that we needed something a bit more systematic that would really help align practices. So what we have done here is develop what we're calling a treatment philosophy. So what does that mean? What is a treatment philosophy? Well, we have defined this as a set of fundamental beliefs about how we want to approach supporting our clients and families. And really, we built this philosophy by looking at our values, talking to families and hearing about their experiences, and very importantly, advancements in the area of autism support towards those contemporary practices. So going back to many of the articles that Erin cited and the research that's been done on the definitions of compassion and what that looks like, taking all of that and sort of putting it together in one unifying place. So our vision for this philosophy was really to do a few core things. One was just align our clinicians, to give them a guide for how to act in ways that we felt aligned with compassion. And then to use that as a tool to help train new staff and make sure that anybody we bring into the organization is also able to take those things that we've defined and then put them into practice. Naturally, this becomes a way for clinicians to evaluate their own practices. So they can look at this instrument, this tool, this philosophy, and they can say, how well am I personally doing against sort of all of these elements? And of course, this will then lead to the need for professional development. So now you can see this is giving us a whole structure for how we train, onboard, and continue to develop our clinicians. And then finally, it leads us to do things like this today, to advocate for this, to push this forward, and to hopefully, as Erin's paper demonstrates, to be leaders in the field doing this work. This was a very large team that developed this philosophy. This was started late 2020. We started officially working as a team in 2021. It took a lot of effort These are some of the people that were integral to the work of this project. There were many others that provided input along the way, but I would hate to not give them the credit that they deserve. Each of these individuals felt very passionately about these topics, and they volunteered to do this work, and this was all optional for them. There was no, they were not forced to participate in this project. So I'm going to go through sort of the 8 tenets or primary dimensions of our treatment philosophy. Now, if this is a new present, if you haven't watched my prior presentation on the future of autism services, then this will be new. But if you have watched it, some of this is going to be review, so I do apologize. I'm going to focus more on what we're teaching our clinicians to do rather than sort of the philosophies demonstrated here. But family-centered care, I think, is at the heart of our philosophy. And this is actually something that AZA has been committed to from day one. AZA was founded by families for families. So we've been incorporating these practices for a long time. But again, this was an opportunity to really define and coalesce. But in this model, under this model, our clinicians are trained to implement the 8 tenets of family-centered care. Things like strengthening caregiver relationships, seeing families as families first, making sure that we're using communication strategies that really clearly explain the process, and also recognizing that every family is going to have different needs, and we're going to try to help them in the most meaningful way. Another tenet of our treatment philosophy is a commitment to neurodiversity affirming care. One of the biggest criticisms in ABA and other autism services has been that efforts are often aimed at changing the person, changing the autistic person, fixing their autism. And neuroaffirming stance says that that is not okay. That is not how we want to be. So at AZA, with our philosophy, our providers are taught how to distinguish between characteristics of autism and autism-related limitations. So, for example, we wouldn't necessarily target something like eye contact unless it is having a distinct and definable impact on that person's functional limitation. Instead, they're taught to identify strengths and preferences and even individual special interests, and hopefully finding ways to use those things to build better outcomes. Our treatment philosophy includes this idea of culturally responsive care. So we're committed to creating systems and staff trainings that provide quality care to our clients, regardless of their culture, their religion, their economic status, their language, their sexual orientation or identity, their age or their beliefs, or anything that makes them unique. We're committed to focusing on the individual and the distinct intersecting cultural variables that are impacting them and their client needs. So we focus on teaching our providers to work collaboratively with clients and identify those cultural aspects in the environment. And I think most importantly here, what we've really focused on is helping our providers actively seek out their own biases and learn to recognize when they may be bringing in kind of their own interpretations and their own cultural beliefs into a setting working with the family, so that they can kind of hopefully recognize that and sort of leave those things at the door and really be able to work with the family on the family's terms. Talked a lot about quality of life. This is probably the area I feel like the most passionate about. Essentially, we believe that just a high quality of life is the most important thing. So we've spent a lot, we've put some resources into making sure that we are objectively measuring quality of life for families, and really training our providers how to work with families to uncover those most important elements. So the way that we assess, the way that we interview, the way that we discuss families, making sure that we're doing that and evaluating treatment against that definition, against what the family has said. Hey, this is what a really good quality of life would look like for my child. Are we living up to that? I've talked a lot about assent-based practices. Assent-based practices essentially aim to give clients more choice, more self-determination, as Erin said. When you have the freedom to choose to learn and to be a part of the intervention, outcomes are better. So we've made a commitment to that. Our providers are taught ways to make peaceful progress, to use strategies, to make sure that our clients are relaxed and happy when they're engaged in treatment. And we're teaching them how to document what it looks like when a client has removed their consent for treatment. As we've seen through some of the research about how well behavior analysts do when it comes to collaborating and showing compassion towards families, we have seen that there's a lot of room for improvement. So we spend a lot of time in this philosophy working towards explicitly teaching our clinicians how to be good collaborators and how to approach that collaboration with humility instead of kind of that expert mindset. So we try to adopt that position of humility when we're working with both families, but also with other service providers. As someone who oversees the speech therapy services and occupational therapies and ABA, I can tell you that collaboration is critical to meaningful long-term outcomes and also really important to families. Having providers that are all working on the same page is a huge relief for families. So we just try to teach them to demonstrate that willingness, to have an open mind, to learn, to not come into the situation as though like, we are the experts and we're here to teach you. It's kind of the opposite. Like you as a family member, you are the expert. We're just here to support you with what you're telling us is important. Another really important element for us, this has always been the case, but again, it's just worth noting and being explicit, is this idea of always being extremely transparent in the work that we're doing. There's nothing more precious to a family than their child. And so our commitment is just to be completely transparent in the work that we do. We're really proud of the work that we do to support clients, and we want you to come watch. We welcome observations, we welcome questions, both from families, but also from other stakeholders. We would happily share treatment objectives, plans with other providers, and we sort of embrace that idea of transparency in all aspects. You're going to see that show up in a couple ways for our providers, teaching them, to clearly explain protocols, answer all questions fully, not hold anything back, and of course, obviously, having eyes on that treatment as it happens. And the last sort of tenet of our treatment philosophy, something that the team felt was just critical, we can't forget about, is really this idea of advocating for and promoting community inclusion. We feel that those natural supports need to accompany or complement more formal supports that promote maximum independence and quality of life. We know that our time is limited. We're going to be with the family for a short time, and our hope is to build skills and provide opportunities for clients to be successful in their environments, whatever those environments are, and hopefully with fewer services or no services in an ideal world. We believe that full community participation for all autistic people needs to occur from the start, and our clinicians are trained and taught how to use those preferences, those special interests, to hopefully try to encourage more of that community participation. And again, advocating for that inclusion and that full participation whenever we get the opportunity. So that's just a little about the work that we're doing to try to really advance this topic. But I'm going to now hand it back over to Erin to close this out.
All right. Thanks, Carrie. I'm going to take us home here and talk about our other ABA program. We call it Clinical Family Coaching. This is a unique model centered around empowerment and expanding choices for families. In a nutshell, CFC is a graduation-based behavioral health outpatient program focused on caregiver training and the treatment of severe problem behavior. CFC treats children and adults living in their family homes or group homes. The mission of the program is to make family members and caregivers part of the treatment team from the very beginning, and to help them do more of what problem behavior is keeping them from. To explain a little bit of how the program is designed to do just that, I'll describe our purpose-developed assessment and treatment plan model. The assessment we developed is called a Behavior and Context Questionnaire. The purpose is not only to understand what is causing problem behavior, but understand what aspects of family life are being restricted because of that behavior. We want to know if and how that behavior impacts sibling relations, outings, meal times, vacations, shopping, playtime, bedtime, etc. And then we want to know which of those activities are the most important to them, because those become the focus of treatment. Moreover, treatment sessions almost exclusively involve parents or caregivers working with the team using ABA strategies in the context of the things that they have identified as most important. It's not always the case that severe problem behavior can be improved to the point of elimination across the board, but by focusing treatment on the activities and routines that matter most to the family, we can stay focused on increasing meaningful options and quality of life. The last thing I'm going to mention is our changing choices assessment. This is something we've implemented very recently, but the point is to monitor choice expansion over time. It's a monthly survey that goes out to families that asks about behavior improvements, if families or parents' confidence with strategies have improved, and if and how their level of stress or mood has changed. Moreover, we want to see that if there has been changes in those things, do they find themselves doing more of what they care about? For example, can they have company more often than before? Can they do more outings? Can they go on vacation? Can they access childcare that they weren't previously able to? Can they spend more quality of time with their children? And again, we believe that if the answer to these questions is yes, our treatment is moving people toward a higher quality of life in a non-abstract way. To wrap up, I want to say that we've talked about compassion, and I, most of all, have talked about compassion in a very sort of technical and clinical way. And I don't mean to take the caring or emotion out of it. In fact, quite the opposite. I want to make sure that we are taking it very seriously, and that my compassion is informed more by how others are impacted by it than what my intentions were. And with that said, clinically, organizationally, we're striving to understand what matters to people. We are trying to make choices available to them as often as possible so that they might choose the most meaningful course of action for themselves. We're striving to have methods to be aware of suffering and how it restricts choices, and focus treatment on outcomes that ultimately expand one's ability to freely choose to do what matters to them. This is what compassion and compassionate care means to us. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that this has meant something to you.